Great. Welcome, everyone, to today, our July 2025 Arctic T-SLIP webinar event. And today we are so grateful to have emergency managers and fire chiefs here in Alaska joining us to talk about emergency management on the landslide hazard. And we have here, so we'll start off with a presentation roundtable here on panelists. We have some questions for them. And first, I'm going to do an introduction on Arctic T-SLIP, and then we have all questions and discussions. So I want to grab here our introduction slides. So the Arctic T-SLIP, we have a webinar series. We have monthly events, and it stands for Arctic Tsunami Slope Instabilities Partnership. And our mission is to foster connections, people interested in this hazard, and to generate a shared understanding of this hazard, especially in regions affected by glaciers and permafrost. And we really want to facilitate collaboration so we can identify and frame research needs, because our funding for NSF is a planning project. So by the end of the planning project, mid 2026, we are welcome as a community at large to submit a nested group of research proposals on the topic, so we can ask for a bit more money than what's typically available. And yeah, so we're here to hear what opportunities and needs there are, and to inform our proposal development in particular. And so we have upcoming webinars as well here with the local monitoring and systems with the Sitka Sound Science Center, and they work with the Tlingit and Haida tribal councils, and also in late July and early August as well on geologic hazard from the Geologic Science Center, USGS, and also from our Norway colleagues. Norway is very far ahead in landslide hazard and landslide tsunami generated hazards as well. So look forward to that. So we'll record the first half, and then we have an open discussion at the end. And today's panelist, we have Brenda Ahlberg. She is the emergency manager for the Kenai Peninsula Borough. And we have Casey Cook. He is the emergency manager for the Matanuska-Susitna Borough. And then Steve Rydeen, fire chief in Ketchikan Gateway Borough. And Brenda and Casey and Steve, they have decades of experience of managing natural hazards in Alaska for the people in their communities. And Alaska is not short on natural hazards. However, the landslide hazard and the landslide generated tsunami hazards is probably the one that are the least mature in how we understand it from a scientific sense, and therefore also limited information available for informing management efforts. So we're here today to find ways where the science community can help Brenda and Casey and Steve in the work that they do. And I've been very impressed. I've got the pleasure to meet Brenda and Casey at meetings in the previous year here, and they are incredible in finding ways, working through challenges with very constrained resources. And so I'm so grateful that we have you here in Alaska with us. And so thank you for that. And let's see here. We have some questions. I'm going to put them here in the chat so everyone can see too. So our first one, we'll go around our panelist team here. So where are you in your work right now today in the work of preparedness and response to this hazard, the landslides and landslide generated tsunami hazards, and especially compared to other hazards in Alaska? And one specific aspect we're interested to hear about is outreach programs. What outreach programs do you currently have in place to inform the public about this potential danger? as well. So yeah, so where are you today in managing this hazard? So Casey and Steve and Brenda, grab the microphone and we'll hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Ladies first.
I was going to say alphabetical order, so that didn't matter because I was still A. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brenda Ahlberg, and thanks so much for this invitation. Even in developing the questions for this session, really brought to mind where we aren't, because on the Kenai Peninsula, it's fairly new for us to experience landslides that may impact residents or in populated areas. So I would say that we're really in that phase of evaluation. We have had a couple of landslides in the last few years that definitely did impact our residents, specifically the landslide that cut off Lowell Point Road for 30 days. And that has initiated additional conversations and the need for what those products need to be for evaluation and for outreach. In the meantime, what really helped us spur the conversation for awareness and actually created some actionable items is those tsunamic generated events, and that isn't likely going to allow us a time frame of early alert and warning. So what could we do to create public awareness? And that campaign includes currently our tsunami awareness campaign, what to be looking for from a natural perspective, either hearing or seeing, so that people can respond appropriately. I would say before, punting over to Casey, we learned last year with an event that happened in Peterson Bay, an area where there's a lodge. They have folks that come in and out of the area. What we learned from that was notification and who needs to be part of that process, even for areas that may see minimal population interaction. But what does that interface look like with responding agencies or collaborating agencies? And the importance of ensuring that folks on the department side have the information they need. So whether, even if it's not for a response, what is it for an evaluation? Who needs to know? Who do we need to ensure is at the table? So I think that event really helped us create another set of dialogue that we hadn't thought of before. And Casey, I'll punt to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brenda. Any questions for Brenda, I guess, before I'm not really probably going to say much different, but any questions for Brenda? All right, can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yes.
So yeah, so I would say, our preparedness level is at the very beginning of the evolutionary phase, right? So getting the data that you guys are providing, having those conversations, getting some information to then be able to come up with, excuse me, a specific plan for, T-slip type events and landslides, because it's a risk, but it's one of those low probability, high impact events, right? And so it doesn't happen often, but when it does, just looking at our map, I don't know if everybody's kind of familiar with South Central Alaska and Southeast Alaska, but it's really going to affect our transportation more so than anything, probably, taking out like a town, which in Steve's case, it's more likely to take out the town than affect the transportation, right? So there's some differences in the way geography works for us, because I think our response to this incident, just like any other incidents, we've got that pretty well down pat, how we're going to respond to, how we're going to fix the problem, for lack of a better term, when it happens. But leading up to it and mitigating, I think, is what we're here for today, and kind of what we're going to. and how to lessen the amount of impact that something like this is going to have in one of our communities. But again, like Brenda said, I think we're still almost prepping to prep, right? And so that's kind of where we're at, and that's why having these conversations is important, so that we can start to collate that information and then be able to present it to the people who make the decisions above us, whether that's politicians or our bosses or the legislature, to provide more money for whatever scientific data you give us as the best course of action, if that makes sense. 1B, our outreach program for this is pretty minimal as well. We rely a lot on Hig and Joseph Davis, who live in those areas, to kind of lead that outreach and lead that preparedness program and lead that community interaction, because that's where it's going to affect the Matsu Borough specifically the most, is in that area where it might shut down the Matanuska River and take out the Glen Highway and lead to all those problems I was just kind of talking about. And so I think that's kind of, we do outreach well. We just haven't implemented T-slip landslide information into that outreach yet. Then I'll turn it over to Steve.
I thought you had more. I'm Steve Rydeen. I'm the emergency manager for the Ketchikan Gateway Borough and fire chief for one of the districts in the borough. Where are we in our work? It's basically the same as Kenai and Matsu. We're still trying to figure out a good approach for preparedness. Ketchikan, if you look at our hillsides over the last 5 years with all the mountains around, there's been a lot of smaller slides. Last year when we had the bigger slide, and I say bigger because Wrangell's was a lot bigger than ours, is when it really kind of came to light. We were promised, or we requested, I guess maybe a better phrase to use, LiDAR mapping that they did so that we could identify areas that were potential slide areas. We haven't received that yet, and it's been August, it'll be a year. So hopefully we'll get that and we can move forward. So right now our preparedness to the response is we try to do media blitz once in a while, especially when it's heavy rain, which we've gotten a lot of. The borough hired its own PIO this year, which has really helped us in getting the word out for different problems that we've had in the Ketchikan area. So that's kind of where we're at with that. As far as the landslide generated tsunamis, that's my only concern with tsunamis in this area is a landslide where we've got such deep water and sheer rock cliffs, if you will, under the water that, we've had a number of earthquakes in Alaska. The big Anchorage earthquake, I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old, and all we had was about a 12-inch rise or 8-inch rise in the tide. And then the last two that I remember were in 2012, maybe 2013, off the Canadian coast, and we saw about a 12 to maybe 14-inch rise from that. So as far as tsunamis, we're pretty well isolated because of all the islands around us and everything. However, the landslides under the water that we can't see is what worries me the most, because I think that would affect us more than an actual earthquake tsunami that's somewhere in Alaska or Canada. we'll continue to work towards this. I know that I have support from the Borough Assembly to do preparedness work for response. The one thing we did learn in the landslide we had in August was it took all of us on the island. It was, everybody was there, and it was a long and tedious process. And we could talk about the response side of it for probably an hour, but when your resources are limited, the preparedness part is very, very key to your success. And then 1B outreach programs, we're currently working on those. I mean, it's an ongoing thing, and until we really look at our areas that are subject to a possible landslide, you know, we can only put out the information that we have. Next.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Steve and Casey and Brenda. You're confirming like what I was seeing, that this is a hazard that we're in the early stages of addressing in the hazard management, and at the same time, you have a lot of tools and approaches that at your hands that are well tested and well used, that you can modify and apply for this hazard. There's a lot to do for all of us in this. So let's jump over to number 2 right away, and then as your questions pop up, you know, you can put it in the chat too, and as well. So many options there. So on number 2 here, so coming into how science studies and how science data can help. So how can science data help you in managing landslide or landslide generated tsunami hazards? So this is, you know, the whole range of the management, because it's starts with, you know, knowing where the hazard exists, and so how to assess it, and then the mitigation part, and the warning, and the response. So the whole package deal. How can science data help you?
Are we going in order again? Or just jumping?
It's your turn.
Go for it, Casey.
All right, so I'll start. So, and I'm gonna use an example. So when we had the meeting up in Glacier View last fall, or I can't remember when it was, almost a year ago now, a comment was made about, you know, we're all used to hearing the term permafrost in Alaska and what that looks like, and we have this picture of, you know, tundra and woolly mammoth bones, you know, coming out of gravel pits in Fairbanks, right? That's kind of our idea of permafrost and what that looks like. And as you fly further north up into the Utqiagvik area, and you're flying over the tundra, like, you know, you're looking at permafrost, and the millions of lakes that are up there is caused by permafrost. So with that in mind, when somebody says, you know, what's causing this kind of T-slip degradation is the permafrost melting underneath the mountains, right? And so you have mountains that are permafrost. And so it hadn't really affected me much. I hadn't thought about it that way until that comment was made. And as, for whatever reason, the permafrost that's holding these mountains together melts, and gravity takes effect, and whatever frictional coefficient was holding those mountains up is lost, and then they slide, right? Because that's what gravity does. It brings things down to sea level, or below sea level. And so taking that kind of allegory, for lack of a better term, to somebody and talk about that, regardless of what their belief is in global warming or climate change, as we start to see that, whatever's causing that permafrost to melt, whether it's heat or cyclical nature of heat or increased heat or a lot of warm water, like in Steve's case, where if it's raining more, you know, water is warmer than ice, and so, or frozen ground, and it's going to warm it up. So whatever heating action that's occurring causing these landslides to happen, again, we can talk about it and have a plain English conversation, but the scientific data is what helps us sell that. And so the more scientific data that we have to say, this is why it's happening, this is what it looks like when it's happening, we can then turn that into that plain language English speak for not only our residents and the people who might be affected by it, but then by policymakers and decision makers at the local elected level to say we need to focus on X, Y, and Z because of A, B, and C. And here's the data that supports we're probably going to see more of this, and this is why it's happening, or this is why we think it's happening at least. And again, in a data-driven society, like we need that to help support our pleas for money, programs, monitoring, notifications, all those types of things. So that's kind of that's how I think the scientific data is going to help us do that. Because again, it's easy to tell somebody a story, but until that light bulb clicks on when we're talking about, mountains of permafrost melting and sliding, it's hard to wrap your head around when you're used to tundra being flat and permafrost being flat and, that type of thing. So that's my answer.
Brenda, do you want me to go next?
Go for it.
Okay. So we're a little bit different down here in the southeast region because of our mountainous areas, and basically every town in southeast is built on the side of a mountain or hill. I think that the geologist data that we are able to collect will help us figure out where potential slides are, where we can focus our energy on letting the people in those areas, put them on warning that they're in a potential slide area. The one that happened first, August 25th, I believe, we saw heavy brown water coming just minutes before the slide happened, and took the life of that one person and wiped out the 4 houses. So that's, if we would have had a geologist study in these areas in southeast, it might have played a factor in the results, but it was after the fact that data that they collected, they were able to say this area is suspect, or this area looks pretty secure. So that kind of data I think is important for our future, as far as looking at our populated areas and able to put people on warning or what to look for and that kind of thing. The responses, I think the key to the response part of this is when you identify the slide, whoever your emergency manager is needs to be on the phone with the state, declaring an emergency, so that we can start getting resources deployed no matter where you are in the state, because it takes a long time. Unless you Kenai Peninsula or somewhere there's on the road system, or Fairbanks. But when you're out in western Alaska or southeast or south, wherever, it takes them time to spool up and to get somebody coming down. We were fortunate; we had 2 people from the state EOC down here within 24 hours. We had state geologists down here within 24 hours. Mort was here within 24 hours. I believe he worked for DNR. Capital City Rescue, Fire and Rescue was here within 24 hours. So by activating the state EOC helped our response when we set up our local EOC, and we were able to get what we needed down here in a fairly timely manner. We had 6 inches of rain that one day, where we hadn't had that. Well, we hadn't had a heavy rain for a long time, like 3 weeks or so. And then all of a sudden we got deluged with 6 inches of rain, and you've got all these heavy trees on that hillside. And, that I think that was one of the keys to what happened was we had real dry soil, if you will, and big dump of rain, and we were off to the races. And that's 2 months I'll never get back.
Steve, your comment about the brown water, I remember Torsten's in Iceland, he's a geologist in Iceland. He mentioned that they had this big rain event in the middle of the winter in December, and a big landslide. And just before that landslide happened, the creeks, the rivers, the streams coming down the mountainside, you would have been gushed full with water, but there was very little water coming down despite all this precipitation. So I think there's a lot to learn from the local observations that can later be used as sort of hints and indicators that maybe you have to get people out of the area because there might be something big coming.
Right. And we are a little bit different than farther up north, central, and that kind of area, because we don't have the permafrost like they have up there, because we don't get as cold. We might see 15 days in the year where it's 18 degrees, but it's never much colder than that for any length of time. So the permafrost really isn't here like it is up in Fairbanks and Western and Prudhoe and all those areas. So anyway.
Yeah, and at the same time, there's very little science done on alpine or mountain permafrost in Alaska. So there's a lot more we can learn there too. Yeah. Denny.
Hi, Anna. Everyone is Denny Capps. I'm a geologist for the National Park Service, and previously a geologist in Denali for 13 years. And I just want to back up what you just said, and also Steve, that as a scientist, if you parachute into these areas, you might look at the stream and think it's like really muddy, where a local will be like, it does that every time it rains. And so, it really does help having someone that has experience with those streams to be able to tell you when it seems different. Like I said, if it's not flowing and it should be, or if it's even muddier than normal, because as an outsider, when you come into those things, even if you're trained, you don't know what the norm is. And so that local experience there to recognize that is absolutely critical.
Thank you for making that point, Denny.
And the other thing is, muddy to one person may not be muddy to the next person, because when we kind of did some outreach right after that landslide, we said, if the water is dirty, call us. And most of the time our water coming off the hills is fairly clean. I mean, there's a little bit of dirt in, but I mean, so we were getting inundated with phone calls. We've got muddy water. We were running all over the place. So we had to adjust our message a little bit so that people didn't freak out, because everybody was on edge. So, yeah. And then the second slide we had was basically man-made, because they were doing some construction and blew some rocks away. So they fell down.
Thank you, Steve. Brenda, yeah, how can scientific data or information help you?
Well, from preparedness all the way through response and mitigation, it's important. So from our perspective, looking at the events that we've had to date, even prior to that, we have areas that HIG has been phenomenal to work with, where we're looking at areas that we need to be constantly monitoring, and what that may look like for future response, even at a minimum for outreach. And whether it's for recreational areas or areas where subdivision development is going to be potentially taking place, just getting in that habit, even as local jurisdictions, understanding what those values at risk may be as it relates to potential landslide areas. I think that's significant. I think from a response perspective, and just tying in on what Chief had said, what was very helpful for us during the landslide on Lowell Point Road was that geologists were able to come in and ground truth that area and provide us an initial report of findings, not only for what we needed for continued response, but potential recommendations for mitigation, or even for outreach for that matter. And I found that very helpful. That report it confirmed that should we have another significant landslide off of Bear Mountain, which is what impinged Lowell Point Road, that it could create a tsunamic event based on the bay and the bathymetry of the bay. And so what does that mean for us as emergency responders when it comes to that outreach perspective? Because time is not going to be in our favor when it comes to public alert and warning. So what is it that we can provide to our residents and visitors that empower them to understand from that data validation into an interpreted outreach program that they can not only understand but feel empowered to be part of when it comes to their own situational awareness? I think that's really, really important, because when it does come to an actual response mechanism, then hopefully we've been able to see where people have been able to get themselves out of harm's way, and hopefully that recovery process isn't as detrimental as maybe could be. I think also when it comes to um, being able to have that science and those subject matter experts providing us those recommendations, that we have a clear demarcation from what their recommendations are versus what our job is. And it's not just in this natural hazard, but in others where I think we have a blurring of lines because everyone has great intentions, but they don't understand their role when it comes to ICS. And that's I think something that we need to have part of that scientific data, where the subject matter experts are interpreting it for us and providing us recommendations, but then that's done. So then that baton gets handed to the emergency managers or mitigation specialists to say, this supports our efforts in XYZ. I think that's also equally important. I think the other part of that is sharing after action reports that are scientific or that are data driven, that are supported by subject matter experts to say, here's what's happened in outlying areas that if modeled against your area, you could see XYZ. For example, in Peterson Bay, where that was on the east side of our peninsula, very similar terrain and or topography, that we could potentially use that data against what may or may not happen in Resurrection Bay. And I'm happy to share that link. National Park Service was very kind in giving us their final report for that event that happened last August. Let me put that in. And what I found, come on, please do this for me. What I found interesting, hopefully you guys can see this. I can't cut and paste and talk at the same time. What I found interesting was some of the information that was relayed even as much as a year later would have been very helpful to have early on. And I can theorize as far as this disparity. I don't want to, but what it gave for me was any information that is there, we should be sharing. We should be sharing so that it could potentially assist us with populated areas, i.e., this landslide did create a tsunamic event, a small one, but it did. Even as much as a equipment, heavy equipment that we're talking tonnage that was moved 30 feet from its original position. The impact of that, how can that data be translated and used to create predictive services in populated area? I think that would also help us in our outreach projects when it's anomalous to most people. It's not going to impact me, but it could. And so help, I know now I'm talking in circles and I don't mean to be, but to help our residents understand that from a perspective that they understand. I always like to say, what would Granny want to know so she can make the right decisions?
And on that data sharing, Brenda, from the scientific community, I mean, this in academia, we're like so brainwashed, so trained to like we share our work on conferences and stuff, but it's not really, it doesn't go public and become public available until it's gone through the peer review process and publication, and maybe a journalist pick it up. But from my conversation with you and Casey before, is that you would be interested to hear, even if it hasn't been peer reviewed yet and gone through all this vetting process, you welcome the information, in a much earlier stage. And is that correct?
Absolutely. And it's not a matter of, again, what is that demarcation that we create where it's a value added conversation for both of us. And that's where I really appreciate talking to Hig when he says, here's an area you might want to look at and why. And that's all I need to know. And then if I need additional information and it needs to be clearly studied using other mechanisms of doing so, then I at least have had the start of a conversation to get me there.
Yeah, and on that, Anna, so just that, that pre-peer review versus post-peer review, right? So yes, in academia, you can't talk about, you can't, have this this is fact, right? Until after your peers review it and say, yep, sounds good to us, or ask those questions. I think, the majority of us on this side, the non-academia side, are at least smart enough to read through something and ask some of those questions ourselves. And then, at least know, right? So then when we're talking to the public, we're talking to our bosses, the politicians, those types of things. We can say, here's kind of what the scientists are saying. Here's my thoughts on that as a professional. And then here's what we're waiting for. And so then that helps us to have those conversations and manage those expectations, as opposed to just saying, well, there's a study coming out, but it hasn't been peer reviewed yet, so we can't quote it. But that doesn't stop whatever is happening in the natural world from happening. That's more of a self-imposed parameter from the academic side to say we can't really talk about this until afterward, but it's not going to stop it from happening. So I think that's helpful for me, at least, going on with Brenda's conversation, to have those conversations so we can at least be aware of what's being done. And then when those questions get asked us on the public level, we can say, here's an interesting study that's being worked through the process. When it's done, we will have a more formal answer for you, but here's what we have right now.
And I would say, if I could just real quickly, Danny, I see your hand is up, is, in a response mode where we're asking subject matter experts to evaluate a particular geological feature, whether we need to blast it or not. We're not waiting for peer review, right? We are relying upon your expertise to give us a management action point that allows operations to either do additional blasting or not. And so I think that can lend very well to any of this initial evaluations that's being done in your purview.
Yeah,
Sorry
our public review process is, the 100,000 residents we have living in our community.
Exactly.
Right, and so we're
We have
an
an operational
about that.
period.
If you think it's stressful going, sending out your document for a peer review or your PhD dissertation, just imagine that times 100,000 experts in the field coming, you know, and Chief Rydeen's, I don't know how many people live in Ketchikan, right? 10,000 or so, 15,000. All of them show up at his doorstep, you know, at 9 o'clock at night saying, hey, we're reviewing your processes right now.
Bring it on, baby.
Yeah, I think you have the most thorough peer review, indeed. Denny.
Yeah, just wanted to build on this because I recently was peer reviewing a paper that kind of gets at some of these issues. And this one was specifically about avalanche hazards in Juneau, but it crosses over. And so one of the other things that's really important for community members like we have here is that there's a tension here because even if we do go through a peer review or if we get through something faster, some of this information is not good for some people's economic interest because they find that their home is in a landslide zone, or their business is in a landslide zone, or their property they would like to develop is in a landslide zone. And you know, there have been examples from other states where landslide maps have been put out, and not only have those maps been retracted, but the whole group of scientists that did the work were eliminated. So you know, there is a tension in here and trying to find that. And so community members like yourselves translating that to the people there on the ground is super important.
That's a good point. We had we were looking at some of the landslide areas that we identified, and the realtors were not very happy with us. Even some of the politicians were like, well, that's not going to help our economy, and that's going to, you know, really cut the assessed values and sale values of some of these structures in the, you know, in these areas. And yeah, we got a lot of pushback on the hazard areas that we identified. And so that kind of got dropped. My I think my direction right now is I really like the Matsu book that they put out, magazine with hazards and different stuff in it. And I think that's the direction we're going to go with general information, so that we don't freak people out or try to cost them money with their putting them in a landslide zone, but make them aware through a all hazards type of magazine that like Matsu put out a year ago.
Yeah, and this takes us right into the next, the last question here. Like, what hazard management approach do you think would work well for communities in Alaska? Because what is done in Norway or what's done in Iceland or Greenland might not work well here because we have a different culture. So yeah, what do you think is a management approach for us here?
I guess it's my turn to start since the other two already took on the first two questions. Um, Ketchikan's about 15,000 people, I guess, something like that. It's fairly diverse, large native population, Filipino population. So, you know, our management, I think, you know, we have a good EOC developed for incident mitigation and that kind of thing. So our messages, I think, would be best served by doing a publication every year or a publication every 6 months, empowering, you know, the native corporations to help work with their people, and you know, the leaders of the Filipino population to be able to work with their people and go forward that way. For at least for us, I think might be the best answer.
Didn't he have his hand up for a question?
I'm sorry, I'm used to Microsoft Teams where your hand goes down automatically after a while. I will lower that.
I thought you were just trying to high five us, Danny.
Good, I like that interpretation.
So from my perspective, I would look at it a couple different ways for mitigation. That includes our first responder safety. So on the east side of the peninsula, we have 13 watersheds that loves to change the Resurrection Bay area on a regular basis anytime there is a rain event. And most geologists that come into the Resurrection Bay area just are wowed by all the opportunities of research that they can do. What that does for us when it comes to flooding season is that our operations have the tools necessary to, when they're out ground truthing potential areas that need to be responded to, that they have in place the local knowledge that this is what you need to hear, this is what you need to look for, this is what you need to listen for, this is what you need to feel for when they're out in the field so that they're safe. We ended up creating a response book so that wherever they're at, in whichever division, that they're constantly have their head on the swivel because things can change so quickly. Well, what does that mean on the mitigation side with residents is giving, you know, that local knowledge, being able to share that from a public outreach perspective. I think what keeps me up at night is we have little to no warning with a landslide. And how can we mitigate that through outreach so that impacts to life safety are minimal?
Okay, I guess it's my turn. So, I'm sure Brenda and Chief can empathize with this, but so Anna, let me back up. So you made a comment about what mitigation programs would work for Alaska, but then the actual question work well for your communities, right? So huge different population that you're looking at. I know at least here in the Mat-Su borough, as a second class borough, people live in the borough to not be impacted by government, for lack of a better term. And so they don't like people coming in and telling them, here's how you should build, here's where you should build, here's the level of building compliance you should have when you build a building or where you build. And so that's one of the biggest things that we come up against, at least here in the borough, is we can have the information, we can get it out to the people, but they're still free to make decisions that may, you know, eventually lead to bad things happening to them and where they build and how they build and what they build. And so all that being said, our hazard management approach here in the Mat-Su borough is at least saying, here's the information. Now you as a member of the public, as a citizen, you can take that information and you can use it. You can not use it. You can debate it. You can disregard it. You can do whatever. But that's on you. And that's all fine and well, because that's the community we live in. That's how democracy works. Until something bad happens, right? And then they're like, well, why didn't you make us do this? Why didn't you tell us this? Why didn't you do these things? And so that's the problem really that I have is I can lead the horse to water, but I can't make them drink until they're dying of thirst. And they're, you know, why didn't you give me more water? Well, I did, but I can't make you drink it. And so, you know, we do a hazard mitigation plan and a hazard management plan. Again, we put that out for the borough to digest at their leisure and at their convenience. But I think in our case, specifically using Joseph Davis again, those local community-led efforts really is going to be the best hazard management approach, is when they get it from somebody who doesn't work for the government, who doesn't have a necessarily an academic title, or an academic background. It's somebody that comes in and says, hey, this is a problem. We need to do something about it, or we need to be ready for it, and then be able to reach back out to the local government to say, okay, we're at this point now, we want help, please help us. And that goes from everything from regulation, the monitoring programs, and local community led as opposed to government led, at least here in the Matsu Borough.
I would
Casey,
agree with that.
sorry, this is Denny again. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And one of the ways that I describe that when I'm coming in and like helping groups is like I start with saying, what I've got to say is I'm not being prescriptive. I'm not telling you what to do. Here's some information that you can use to help make decisions for yourself, and really focusing on safety as the number one thing. And, I think a lot of your communities have a really good opportunity right now to take advantage of that because, people have been hurt and killed recently. And so people understand that it's real. It's not just a theoretical thing that the scientists are modeling, but this is happening in your communities, and we're focused on safety, but you can decide for yourself how you want to build your house.
Thank you, Denny. Steve,
Yes, ma'am.
I think you were speaking up earlier. Go for it. Yeah, so what I'm hearing here is following the management approach of empowering the individual, empowering the public, and sharing information, being transparent about what we know and also what we don't know, and that is, I think, also comes back to the science community that we feel comfortable, speaking about sharing about our results and hear what you were saying, finding that boundary of who makes the management decisions and who provides the just the raw basic black information. Like as a scientist, the best help we can do, what I'm hearing, is to just provide the facts. This is what we know, this is what we don't know. No matter if it's been peer reviewed by 3 experts, we can bring it out to the peer review of the 100,000 public members in Nuskasisitnabor, or the 15,000 people in Ketchikan, for that. So yeah, the empowering the individuals, the outreach is very important.
If you're honest with people, you're going to have less conflict in mitigating the problem.
Yeah. Very wise words. Thank you for sharing that. And in the end, we are all people and all human, and having that in mind is a good guide. Well, thank you so much for that.